So I'm going to talk, Adriana did a very brief presentation, but I'm going to basically talk about the heteronormalization of anal sex and try to make links with porn because that's their campaign. So gender, power, and pornography in the context of the mainstreaming of anal sex. If you have any questions, please let me know. And okay, so before we start, this is not a trigger warning, but sort of a quick message. We are going to talk about patterns and dominant meanings ascribed to anal sex. So dominant patterns, cultural patterns, and not particular or individual preferences and practices. So, and this is to answer already to that. Often questions, are you against anal sex? Do you have anything against anal sex? And this is a very traditional question that we feminists that criticize sexualization or pornography or something like that, or that's dare to challenge or to question male-centered practices or male-centered representations of sexuality are asked. It's a very easy label, the anti-sex or the anti-sexuality or the sex negative. No, this is not a sex negative approach. This is at least an anti-sexism approach, an anti-coercion approach. I have absolutely nothing against sex. I have everything against the misogyny that is conveyed in patriarchy through sexuality. So I do not assume at all that all heterosexual anal sex involves or reflects gender coercion. So I want to make this pretty clear since the beginning. And I want to ask you, because I found the content myself when I was doing research, specifically about media representations of anal sex, I found some of the material quite disturbing, personally quite disturbing. So it goes without saying, feel free to leave at any time that you feel disturbed by it. And I'm available after the webinar and whenever you want to talk about it more privately if you feel comfortable. So now let's start. Heteronormalization of anal sex. What do I mean by the mainstreaming of anal sex? Anal sex was classically associated to same-sex relationships, and it has a long story of stigmatization and pathologization that comes across legal frameworks, medical frameworks, social attitudes towards anal sex. And it has started to change pretty recently, and when I say pretty recently, I'm talking about especially the last 2 decades. And the two pillars that mirror this big change of cultural norms around anal sex are basically, or mostly, the proliferation of preferences in popular culture, and at the same time, an increased behavior prevalence within heterosexual couples, within heterosexual sexual partners. So these two sides, these two pillars of this big cultural change, because we are talking a very expressive cultural change, are what I call the heteronormalization of anal sex. And you've probably come across some of these sentences. The anal is the new oral. And you've probably come across some of the representations in the media that I'm going to talk about. Like this is from Broadsheet, a couple of years ago. Hey, it's 2014, anal is on the menu. 2014 was called in pop culture the anal sex year, or the year of the butt year. And this is quite relevant. And why does it matter? Why is heteronormalization of anal sex an issue? Why are we talking about it right now? Sorry, I forgot it. That is anal sex the new oral, or anal is the new oral, and this is from Vice. We are living in a hetero-anal era. So it's quite a big statement, it's quite a strong statement. And why does it matter? Because across all the evidence that there is a change, ongoing change towards anal sex, The empirical studies done so far, they are very consistent in pointing to very gendered patterns of coercion. It's very deep and very gendered patterns of sexual violence around anal sex. Probably some of you have heard the chant that happened in the Yale fraternity chant in 5 years ago, I think, that no means yes, yes means anal. These quite simply mirrors and portrays a sort of male dominance around anal sex that I'm going to talk about a little later. And this was quite relevant, this was a quite important study made in the UK. Sorry, I cannot hear you.
Can you please, can everybody mute their mics, please? There is too much interference for Maria to be speaking. Okay, I think it should be fine.
Thanks. Sorry. This was a quite important study done in the UK. It's published in 2014. And basically they interviewed boys and girls from 16 to 18 years old. And this is a quote from one of the boys. And what they observed and what they witnessed and what the study showed was that boys and girls had very different perceptions and attitudes and expectations around anal sex. Boys basically framed it as another step of male conquest and something that was pretty much a sign of male power across the peer pressure culture. And girls, on the opposite side, they said that they were expected to be pressured, they were already expecting to be pressured, and they were afraid that by giving in, they would damage their reputation. So there was a quite strong double standard underpinning this gender division. But this was, I found it a very powerful statement and a very powerful quote from a boy that said, "Every hole is a goal." Imagine, I think we all can look at it and see it as a portray or a summary of this penetration imperative that underlines heterosexuality in its dominant form. The idea that anal sex is just another chapter of the penetrative experience, that's something that adds into the last step of oral and vaginal sex. Sorry. Oh. So how did it start? Where did it come from? I'm talking about this huge landscape, the media landscape, this cultural change. How did it start? What are the factors that triggered, what are the cultural conditions that triggered these huge cultural and still ongoing change? Obviously, I'm going to start with porn. Pornography, I believe, and we have all the evidence to support this, played a huge role, a strong role in this mainstreaming of anal sex. I believe it was the catalyst. And I want to be pretty clear here. I don't believe it's a cause. I don't believe we can talk about casuality here, because it's much more complex and much more. It's broader than that. It's not as easy as mapping the causes, but definitely pornography plays a huge part. I believe it triggered a cultural dissemination of anal sex, but it will be very simplistic to assume or to say that it had by itself caused it, the mainstreaming of anal sex. And when did anal sex started to be a thing or such an important thing in pornography? Purcell does, I'm going to quote the whole thing because I think it summarizes the whole chronology pretty well. Anal sex morphed from a rarity in the 70s to a special act that was featured at least once in every big gungle movie in the 90s, to the final act of most scenes in major movies in the 2000s, to the main or primary event of nearly every sex sequence by 2010. And the predominance of anal sex in mainstream porn has been well documented. This is a study that had a sample of the best-selling porn DVDs, and not only anal sex, but double anal penetration. They were featured in a pretty high number of movies, and the so-called ATM sequence, the S to mouth. I believe it was, I'm going to go for it, but I believe it was 50%, 55%. I will send you the link to the study, but I'm pretty sure it was something like 55% of the whole sample that already contained 10 years ago the S to mouth sequence. And we couldn't take so much simply from this S to mouth sequence. What does it portray about women's pleasure, or what does it portray about women's humiliation? What does it represent? And in 2015, and this study was done in New Zealand by my very loved PhD supervisor and another student, and they interviewed boys about their pornography consumption, and basically they said 5 years ago that ATM was standard. It was not something that was not shocking or something new to them. So what does anal sex represent? What's its appeal? And I believe this quote from Gildines is pretty relevant here in this context, and she says that the desire to see women usually degraded and powerless explains in part why anal sex has become so popular in porn. In the real world, this act is becoming more common, but I doubt that many women are seeking out the type of anal sex that the pornographers depict. What generally makes anal sex so appealing in porn is the potential pain and harm that robotic and mechanicist thrusting can cause women. And she wrote it in 2010. And you probably heard, you in Radical Girls, doing and organizing this campaign, and you people that are listening to me right now and that talk or are concerned or discuss porn in any context, what about feminist porn? And I brought it here because this is literally the title of an article, a really good article. I highly recommend it, from Becca Business. And the title is, but what about feminist porn? Examining the work of Kristen Taormino. And why Kristen Taormino here? Why is she relevant? Because Kristen Taormino, you probably heard about her. She's a media figure. She calls herself a sex-positive feminist. She wrote his book in '98, The Ultimate Guide to Anal Sex for Women, which is a quite relevant book in this process of mainstreaming anal sex in the media, and she's very connected to the so-called feminist porn. She produced some of the movies. She took part in 2 of them, and I'm going to read it because I think it again speaks volumes to the so-called feminist porn. The most cursory glance at Taormino's career trajectory reveals her messianic enthusiasm, I found it quite strong, for anal sex. Her first book, The Ultimate Guide to Anal Sex for Women, launched her as highly visible spokeswoman for sex-positive feminism. And her identically titled porn video marked the beginning of her career as a porn director. Taormino's focus overlaps with that of pornography industry generally, which during roughly the same period has increasingly fixated on anal sex penetration. This simply says that the so-called feminist porn, shares so much of the guidelines and the scripts and the core representation of what is supposedly very distinct the mainstream porn and porn industry. So supposedly presents something alternative, a niche that targets women and is women's friendly or even feminist. And by analyzing her work, Rebecca Wiesent basically did a huge service, I would say, by showing that the similarities are bigger than the difference at all. And why do I say that porn does not explain everything? And porn, we cannot talk about the direct cause. And why do I believe the concept is not mine, as Adriana may have induced to believe, pornographication? Why do I believe that it's a much more accurate term to make sense of the ongoing process we are witnessing and living, the heteronormalization of anal sex? Because even if you have never been exposed to porn, you will for sure be exposed to pornified society, and you will be for sure exposed to porn influence in any way or another. And what does it mean, pornographication? It's a complex concept. There are alternative and similar concepts that describe and make sense of this process, but it basically describes the process of increasing normalization of pornographic representations in the media, in pop culture, and the permeation of pornographic visual codes in the mainstream media. And the porn chic basically portrays and captures that process of blurring between porn and other cultural spheres and other cultural processes like fashion, like ads. It's everywhere. It's basically everywhere. So we are definitely living in a pornified society or a porn culture, whatever the concept you might prefer. So this is not only about porn consumption. That's the point I want to make. And anal sex in pop culture within this landscape of pornographication. You probably, if you are interested in this webinar, you will probably expose or paying attention to anal sex in pop culture. And you probably have seen one or a few or a lot of representations, and some of them I will be talking about. You probably saw this, A Guide to Anal Sex, that was published in 2017 in Teen Vogue. It was highly contested and highly criticized, and I did basically a genealogy, and I published it this year, genealogy and a whole study across media representation as broad as I could do. So I'm gonna try to expose it and try to present it briefly, so we still have time to have a little chat. But basically what I did was I mapped the media content related to anal sex as much as I could, and then I tried to identify the dominant discourses that were across all those media materials and all those media platforms. And I presented, these were the dominant discourses, the rhetoric of liberation, the educational discourse. I'm gonna show it in some detail. So the first one, they are two different discourses, but they are strongly correlated. The rhetoric of liberation and women's empowerment. And I think this image itself, published in Women's Health 5 years ago, speaks volumes to what I'm talking about. Look at the image, the way the body figure is presented, the colors. Look at the presentation, that fierce expression, like it symbolizes empowerment and sexual empowerment, definitely. And the title could be how can I say, it's quite telling. Everything you need to know if you're trying anal sex this weekend. What's it still doing on your bucket list? So this is Women's Health magazine. It's a magazine that targets only women and has a female-friendly background. And what is this? What is the basic message of these discourses? Rhetoric of women's empowerment and sexual liberation. Basically, it's another chapter. It presents anal sex as another chapter of the sexual liberation. We heard it before. Maybe not. I didn't. It happened 3 decades ago, but this happened already. The big rhetoric around sexual liberation, the idea that we are finally overcoming all the taboos and all the repressions and all the social conditioning around our sexuality, and that women are embracing their right to pleasure and the right to our bodies. And there's obviously a part of truth in that, and a part of potential and I would say good intention in that, but it definitely is tricky. And this is the graphic that came along the Teen Vogue article, and look at this. You probably saw, if you saw the Teen Vogue, you probably noticed that it has a graphic and that it presented male and female bodies without saying men and women or female and male, and it just labeled the bodies differently and called them non-process owner and process owner. So, and the non-process owner, women's bodies basically, were identified as something that lacked a prostate, and the clitoris was not represented at all. And the message was pretty problematic, I would say. It said it is often described, they are talking about anal sex obviously, it is often described as a feeling of fullness, which can be delightful. And this was published in 2017. Why trying anal sex should be your New Year's resolution, Refinery 29 last year. Look at, these are very recent 5 years and very recent messages. They all come from women's magazines. And some of them, the two first are titled 6 myths about anal sex that might change your mind about it. It's time to with your fears in your sphincter. Why you shouldn't be afraid of butt play and how to get it started. You'll never be so happy you face your fears. So you can see how it sounds really prescriptive, doesn't it? More than empowering or more than challenging. It sounds really, you should be engaging and you should be having pleasure. And the second one is pretty much connected to the first two. I call it the educational discourse. I basically understood and noticed that this kind of messages targeting women were everywhere. And they were everywhere in women's magazines when they talked about anal sex, and they addressed virtually every dimension of women's routines. They talked about lubrication a lot, as you can imagine, as you can expect. They talked about hygiene, protection, nutrition, and let me show you. This comes from Women's Health. And that comes from Women's Health. It has other parts that I could not show here, but simply said, how to prepare to anal sex. Eat first, experiment until you find your glass slipper of loops, and poop beforehand. And here from Cosmopolitan, when they had an article called The Food Diary of a Porn Star, so you can see the intersections we were talking about, the pornographication of society. It's everywhere. And this particular woman shared her diary, and she said, I had a Rios again at 9 a.m. At 11 a.m. I ate a mango. I didn't eat much that day because I was going to a friend's house, and I knew I was going to have sex. And I knew I was going to have anal sex, so I didn't really eat very much. So imagine all the preparation, all the managing, all the investment that this message contains. At night time, when I got home, I had fish in cater pots. It was that way. So basically, messaging, she didn't eat virtually anything during the day because she knew she was going to have no sex. I ask you to imagine men being told and being addressed this kind of message. Do not eat. Put beforehand. Clean yourself. Imagine, it's pretty hard for me to imagine men's magazines portraying this kind of messages. It's so detailed, so impositive. And it's virtually addressed all the dimensions, I said it before, and it has a lot of mixed messages concerning women's pain. In a way, they say, sex should not hurt, so you have to do all the preparation, relaxing, use a lot of lube, be sure that you're comfortable, everything, prepare everything so it won't hurt. But at the same time, it's possible that it hurts, and it's expectable that it hurts in the few first times. So, in a way, there are a lot of mixed messages here, and there's a worrying part of normalizing women's pain. And again, I ask you to imagine a gender reversal scenario. Will this be expected? Will this be normal? How would we react to a message that targeted men and normalized their pain? So somebody else will have pleasure with it. And it's pretty twisted, I think. And there's a lot of emotional work involved in all the messages. The immerse, the put beforehand. So basically you have to prepare, you have to do all the adjustments so the sexual act works. I remember my supervisor, when I told her and presented her the initial results and the initial data, and she said, oh, it sounds like women are preparing for a marathon. And when I thought about it, yes, it's a lot of investment, it's a lot of emotional work. The communication, communicate to your partner, buy lube, buy this kind of food, eat first, don't eat too much, put beforehand, have cleaning towels at hand. So there's a lot of regulation around women's sexuality. And those disturbing content to me, the male sex drive discourse, I found that the idea that men are obsessed about anal sex was everywhere, and that the power metaphors were virtually everywhere around, in all platforms, women's magazines, men's magazines, everywhere. And this is an article that I found quite illustrative. It's by telling 5 real reasons guys want to try anal sex. And it was published in Cosmopolitan. It was signed by a male author. And it's basically that he's explaining, he in a male role, he's explaining women how men think. And the 5 real reasons he presents are quite telling. And he starts by saying there's a male obsession with the butthole that women, especially women who aren't into anal stimulation, don't understand. So he will provide information. And he starts saying again, not everyone, this is one of the reasons, so-called reasons, not everyone has been there, kind of like Mount Everest. No, it doesn't matter how many people you slept with, but you probably didn't have the sex with all of those people. So it's just nice to think that if your vagina is the club, your butt is the VIP area. I found it pretty disturbing, to be honest. This is a personal, not academic insight. Another one of the so-called 5 reasons is like eating escargot or caviar, a status symbol. You know how caviar is gross and rich people eat it just because it's expensive? Sometimes guys just want to do it because it's elitist and not for any other reason. I don't know if everyone necessarily wants to eat escargot or caviar as much as they want to be able to tell other people they ate escargot or caviar. Some guys don't even love the idea of anal sex, but it's for the extra cleanup to be able to say they've done it. So you can see the idea that men are obsessed. This is a conquest. This is a power move, and it's something that gives them credit, masculine credit, to talk about among their peers. And this is, I don't know if you've seen or know this movie, The Kingsman, The Secret Service. This was another example of the idea that anal sex, like the vagina is the club and the butt is the VIP area, this idea of conquest, this idea of reaching to something that is not immediately acceptable. So it's a form of, it's definitely a power move in the power representation they're bringing this. And this was another example. The final scenes, there's a blonde princess arrested, and the male hero asks her, if I save the world, do I get a kiss? I always wanted to kiss a princess. And she replies, if you save the world, we can do it in the asshole. And another, this is a step forward, sexism, some extreme sexist and extremely sexist portrayals of heterosexual anal sex that basically renders anal sex an act of phallic domination, as an author called it. And this was an example I found particularly disturbing because it's so easily accessible on Netflix. And Jim Jeffries, on his show Bear, said, women, the reason that men like fucking you in the ass is because we know you fucking hate it. And not very differently, the comedian Jim Carrey said during the performance that the best lubricant for anal sex is not tears, it's blood. This is an image from, this is an image from JQ. I had a lot of potential images to bring here. I tried to make it too much visually disturbing, but this is not that different from what I came across. And this is a quote from Cosmopolitan in the article that discuss anal sex, and it's a quite common approach, like why are anal sex giving you the reasons to understand male minds, and for you to see how, again, the porn message and the porn justification circulates outside the porn consumption. Anal sex is a standard when it comes to porn, so most guys have seen it in action, even when they weren't necessarily looking for it. Because anal has become so mainstream in porn, guys might feel like they're missing out if they are not doing it too. So Cosmopolitan target women. And last discourse, the idea that women are still the sexual gatekeepers, the classic idea that men make the move and we should reject it first and we should be the sexual gatekeepers until we finally give in. But we are the ones that control the move. And as we'll see, this is obviously against and is obviously conflicting with the idea that women should be empowered and sexually empowered, and we are doing it for ourselves, and why is it still on your bucket list? But we'll get there. And you probably know at least Sex and the City. And this is from an episode from 1998, and this is Charlotte, one of the 4 main characters. And this was in an episode where her boyfriend, partner, told her, I want to have dinner, and after that, I want us to have anal sex. And she replied with this look like facing a dilemma, I don't know what I want, but I'm afraid if I don't, you'll dump me. And if I do, then I'll be the up-the-butt girl. I don't want to be the up-the-butt girl. Men don't marry the up-the-butt girl. And for you to see how things change so much and so little at the same time, in 2014, sorry, this is from 2014. This was an episode from the Mindy's project, and it was an episode called I Slipped. The whole episode was around his move, his try to have anal sex. So they were having sexual interaction, and he made a move, obviously an intentional move, and tried to penetrate her anally, and she reacted, and he disguised it as, oh, I slipped. So obviously it normalizes deception and deceptive techniques, and it normalizes coercion a lot. And some women and some feminists, I guess, criticize the cast and the author, Mindy, and she replied saying that that's normal, and there was no peril, that's a normal scenario. Inside a couple's relationship where someone tries and the other is not so available. Obviously, this is a very euphemistic response to a very serious problem. This idea that someone tries without awareness, without any previous thought, without any previous response, without any previous consent, it was portrayed in such a normal and funny way. This is a sitcom. But the same idea, the parallel I want to make here is that she's the one, she's the sexual gatekeeper, just the Charlotte. She's the one, men are the one that initiate, men are the one that suppose can make that move, and we are here, and our role is to make sure we react at the right time, because we are obviously facing a double condemnation. We are or prudes or whores. And so trying to balance this double, how can I say it, this double face of misogyny and this double face of regulation of women's sexuality. And what do I basically want to say about this constellation of discourses that I showed you very briefly? I can tell you I was researching pop culture for months, and this is just a sample. Obviously, as you saw, there are tensions and collisions and pretty serious pitfalls. And why do I say pitfalls? Because, as you saw, women are ascribed very different roles. We are supposed to be sexually empowered, sexually liberated, sexual entrepreneurs, as one author say. We are supposed to be in control of everything, of our pleasure, our sex. We are supposed to be sexually adventurous. Obviously, this is a demand. This is a pressure to. No one wants to be seen as a prude that doesn't read, and nobody wants to be seen or be told we are not, what's it doing in our bucket list, after all. And why do I say this is a pitfall, and why do I think sexual empowerment is really a women's false friend? And because it portrays paradoxical mandatory freedom. What do I say by mandatory freedom? The sexual choices, and these, first we have the discourse that choice everywhere, the individual choice, and the individual, everything is a choice in this neoliberal framework. But when you look at it with a little bit more carefully, there are very different evaluations of choice and the choices available. So firstly, the choice to engage in anal sex is seen as and celebrated as empowering, as an empowering one that embraces pleasure, that liberates women, enhances intimacy with their partner. And in contrast, the choice not to engage or to refuse anal sex, or simply the choice to not to want to try at all, is seen as not truly a choice, but a condition reflex. So basically, we are still not liberated. And women are free. What does it do? What's the work underpinning these dominant discourses? It basically equates freedom with sexual activity, and with a certain kind of sexual activity and a certain kind of sexual repertoire. So the choice not to engage is not truly a choice, and women are free if and when they choose to engage in anal sex. So it seems to be challenging women all the time. Culture is challenging us all the time, like, are you really empowered? Are you empowered enough to try it? And I found this quote quite impressive. Herbonic, she's a researcher and she's also a teacher, and at the university, and she said, but basically, she summarized it in a perfect way to me. What basically this whole message tells us, and tells young women especially, is that if they don't want to do it, they are suddenly not good enough. They are frigid, they are missing out, they are not exploring their sexuality, they're not adventurous. And just to finalize, why is it really a false friend? Because we are doomed if we do, doomed if we don't. So this whole set of discourses, this whole set of rhetorics I showed you very briefly, they basically trap women, and they basically, the script is, they deemed us to fail. There's a high chance women will fail. Because women, if we choose not to try anal sex in the first place, they will be probably accused or be perceived as socially repressed and willing to overcome culturally embedded taboos. And if women engage in anal sex and do not enjoy it at all, if they experience pain or if they experience any kind of distress, what does it say? Because women are addressed this whole scientific package about anal sex, how to make it pleasurable, how to avoid pain. So remember, put beforehand, avoid this food, avoid this, avoid that, do this, do that. Teresa Warren, in her book, she had a whole paragraph talking about how to prepare, and she even talked about meditation. It was like take a bath, candles, music. You will be forgiven to think she was talking about religion or any kind of like Buddhist ritual. And basically it was such a whole investment in the whole energy into the preparation of anal sex that if women do not feel pleasure, if basically women do not like it, it's because they failed somehow, somewhere along the process, somewhere along the way, either by failing to relax, or to use the right amount of lubrication, or because they ate too much, or because they were simply not in the right mindset. So women are compelled to try it, compelled to enjoy it, but still they are told the old message is still here. We are supposed to do it with the right partners and for the right reasons, because the double standard persists and nobody wants to be the epithet girls. And we are still told that men don't marry the epithet girl. So finally, and what matters to me most, the male coercion regarding anal sex is so naturalized. The so-called male obsession is so normalized across the discourses. Men are obsessed. Why are men obsessed? So women are told that men are obsessed, but that women should do it by themselves and for themselves. So this is quite sophisticated. It's not, you should do it for him, as it was clearly portrayed some decades ago. No, it's different. It's much more sophisticated. It's, he wants it, he's obsessed, but you should do it for yourself. Point. Period.